1 Samuel 18, the title of the message is Escaping the Trap of Envy. Escaping the Trap of Envy. We come to 1 Samuel 18, which comes in the chapter. It's a chapter that's immediately following this great, very famous story that we covered over the last 2 weeks of David and Goliath. And David comes in, the people are fearing, they're hiding in fear from this giant. And even the king, the current king, Saul, is out hiding, and David comes on the scene and believes the Lord would give him the victory. It says the battle belongs to the Lord, and the Lord did in fact give him the victory over this great giant. It was in the chapter before that David was anointed as the next king, so he would someday take that seat as king, though currently Saul is serving in that role. And after David defeated Goliath, David is propelled into great notoriety, great fame in the land. People recognize him as this valiant warrior, this man who could go in and have success in the battle. And as we turn to chapter 18, David enters into Saul's court. He's now essentially full-time staff on Saul's staff. And before this, he had been shepherding sheep out in the fields. And then Saul was having some troubles. He was being tormented by an evil spirit. So he would go play the harp for him. That would soothe Saul. But now he's there full time. So whatever Saul would ask him to do or need him to do, that's what David would do. And so what ends up happening then in chapter 18 is David comes into this great notoriety as Saul begins to see that David is the one who's going to replace him. He was aware, but he didn't know it was David yet. And as soon as he recognizes it and realizes it, one word begins to take place, deep envy. I guess that was 2 words. But envy is the word that takes place. And so there's 3 people that I want to focus on in chapter 18. One is Saul, another is Saul's son Jonathan, and another is David. And we're going to circle and underline that word envy. And I'm going to give strategies to escape the trap of envy in your life and mine personally. Envy is a word that's defined as a feeling of discontent, covetousness with regard to another's advantages, success, or possessions. When envy is used in Scripture, it's often used interchangeably with the word jealousy. Jealousy is defined as resentment against or opposition toward a rival or a person who's enjoying success or advantage. Jealousy and envy most often occur when someone has something that another person doesn't, or they're headed somewhere another person isn't, or they've been afforded opportunities the other person has not. It can cause feelings of discontent with what we are, where we are, and what we have been given. The discontentment of an envious person then often leads to resentment towards another person, finding themselves in constant competition and opposition to them. New Unger's Bible Dictionary has a good definition of envy. Here's what we read there. It's that discontented feeling that arises in the selfish heart in view of the superiority of another, nearly tantamount to jealousy. That malignant passion that sees in another qualities that it covets, often resulting in hate for their possessor. Envying is ill will, malice, spite. It always desires and often strives to degrade others, not so much because it aspires after elevation as because it delights in obscuring those who are more deserving. It's one of the most odious and detestable of vices. And as we circle these words, jealousy and envy, and we'll even look a little bit at that word covet, what we find is that envy finds itself on many biblical do not do lists. It's on many of them. In Galatians 5:19-21, we find envy and jealousy on a list that defines the deeds of the flesh. In Galatians 5:26, we read this, let us not become boastful, challenging one another, envying one another. 1 Peter 2:1, therefore rid yourselves of all malice and all deceit and hypocrisy and envy and slander. In James 3, verse 14, it's read, if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. This is wisdom that does not come down from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every evil thing. Now here's another one. Proverbs 14:30, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. Envy rots the bones. There's a story about two store owners that I read this past week. It's not a true story, but it's a funny story nonetheless. There were these two store owners that had similar stores across the street from one another. They were in constant competition. Whenever one got something that the other didn't, they were filled with jealousy and envy. And they would begin to have this competition and opposition toward one another. They would do things to make the other fail, and this was happening back and forth. Finally, one day, one of the store owners was visited in the middle of the night by an angel in a dream. The angel said to the store owner, I'm here to give you whatever you wish for. So you can ask for whatever you wish for, and it will be granted to you. Only here's what you must know. Whatever you are given, your opposing store manager will be given double. So if you ask for riches, the other store manager will get double. If you ask for fame, the other store manager will be twice as famous. If you ask for more business, the other store manager owner will get twice the business. He said, so let me get this straight. Whatever I ask for, twice as much will happen to that other store manager? Yes, he thought for a moment. And he said, okay, make me blind in one eye. You get it? So he'll be blind in two eyes. That was envy. It's at his detriment, but he wanted so bad for that other one to fail that he was willing to ask for such things. Envy and jealousy, closely related with covetousness. That is the desire to have the things, the wealth, the possessions another has. Exodus 20:17 tells us not to covet our neighbor's house, wife, servants, ox, donkey, or anything that belongs to them. In terms of envy, we not only see it in lists, but we see it in biblical accounts. Genesis chapter 4, we remember that Cain was envious because God approved of his brother's offering, but not his. Cain was envious, filled with jealousy, and he murdered his brother. In Genesis chapter 26, Isaac had settled in a new land, and he had worked that land, and he had sown seed. And it said that what was produced, his harvest was 100-fold. He had livestock, he was married, he had a great household, a great harvest and herds. And in verse 14, we read that the Philistines envied Isaac. And because of their envy, what they ended up doing was taking dirt and filling up all of his water wells so that he could no longer water his land. He would end up having to move on from that land. In Genesis 37, Joseph had brothers who envied him because of the favor that was given to him from his father. So they decided to kill him. But instead of killing him, they sold him into slavery. Envy was the driving force behind persecution in the early church. It's said in Acts chapter 5 that the Pharisees and the religious elite saw people coming to hear the apostles, and they were filled with jealousy. And this morning we cover one of the most famous stories that's envy and jealousy, and that's Saul and David. So let's read 1 Samuel 18, verses 1 to 9. And we'll get into it further from there. Now it came about when he had finished speaking to Saul that Jonathan committed himself to David. And Jonathan loved him as himself. And Saul took him that day and did not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David with his military gear, including his sword, his bow, and his belt. And David went into battle wherever Saul sent him and always achieved success. So Saul put him in charge of the men of war, and it was pleasing in the sight of all the people and also the sight of Saul's servants. Now, it happened as they were coming, when David returned from killing the Philistine, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with joy, and with other musical instruments. The women sang as they played and said, "Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s." Then Saul became very angry, for the lyric displeased him. And he said, "They have given David credit for 10,000s, but to me they've given credit only for thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom?" And Saul eyed David with suspicion from that day on. As we dive into this story, I want to note that there are some who escaped envy, the trap of envy, and another who continually walked right into it. From these examples, we'll look at three strategies for overcoming, three strategies for escaping the trap of envy in our own lives. And that's going to have to do with our commitment, our clothing, and where to cast our cares. Let's talk with our commitment. Make the commitment to love and contentment. Make the commitment to love and contentment. The first person I want to look at in chapter 18 is the son of Saul, Jonathan. We were first introduced to Jonathan in 1 Samuel 13. In 1 Samuel 13, Jonathan is seen going and leading a group of soldiers against the Philistines and defeating them. And after he defeated them, we read in 1 Samuel 13 that it was his dad Saul who blew the trumpet and said, "Saul has defeated the Philistines." So Saul's taking credit for what his son did. He's tooting his own horn, literally. And it says, verse 3, Saul blew the trumpet throughout the land, saying, "Let the Hebrews hear." And all Israel heard the news that Saul had attacked the garrison of the Philistines. But right after Saul blew his own trumpet, he blew it with the Lord. This is what happens. I know. The Philistines then assemble this great army. It says that they had 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and the people who were coming were like the sand of the seashore. The Israelites go and they run and hide, and they're hiding out. And that's that place where Saul was to wait for Samuel to offer the sacrifice, but he did not wait. He went against the instruction of the Lord. And it's right there when Samuel comes and he says, "Your kingdom will not endure. You have not followed the Lord. Your kingdom will not endure." And here's the thing about what happened right there. What does that mean? Because he would remain king. They wouldn't anoint the next king yet. But when he said, "Your kingdom will not endure," that meant Saul, none of your sons. See, because normally for a king, it would be one of his sons that would be the next king. But he says, "Your kingdom will not endure," meaning no more. None of your sons are going to take the throne. None of your sons are going to take that seat. Now, his eldest son, Jonathan. So Saul's heir had an impact on Jonathan's trajectory. Jonathan is shown in chapter 14, again, trusting the Lord. He said, "The Lord is not limited, saving by few or by many." And remember, he went and he attacked those Philistines. And Saul is continually shown acting foolishly. Jonathan is continually shown in a positive light, acting wisely, looking to the Lord. But the fact of the matter is that Saul's ways had an impact on Jonathan, and it had an impact on his life in a big way. And so David comes on the scene. So Saul's been told, "Your family, it's not going to be in your line." David comes on the scene. He's now serving in the court of the king. He's a valiant warrior. He's becoming well known, and people were beginning to see David's the guy. Even Saul himself goes, "What more than the kingdom?" In chapter 20, we're going to see him call it right out. This is what he's going to say to Jonathan, his son. 1 Samuel 20:31. As long as this son of Jesse lives on this earth, neither you nor your kingdom will be established. Now send someone to bring him to me. He must die. So what is he doing? He's saying, hey, Jonathan, because Jonathan's going to try to help him out. We're going to see this. But he goes, hey, Jonathan, as long as he lives, your kingdom's not going to be established. We need to kill him. He had great envy. And so Jonathan knew what was being taken from him, what had been taken from him. His replacement of sorts was now on the scene. And it seems that in many cases, he would be filled with envy, jealousy, anger, disdain toward David. But Jonathan shows a different posture. What do we see about Jonathan? It says that he was committed to him and he loved him as himself. There it is. Jonathan committed himself to David. Jonathan loved him as himself. Saul took him that day, did not let him return. And then catch this, Jonathan made a covenant with him because he loved him. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David and his military gear, including his sword, his bow, and his belt. Jonathan remained committed to David and he loved him as himself. Jonathan would not have what David had. David would have what Jonathan thought he would have. Maybe even the things that he wanted to have. But he was content. He was not only content with his circumstances, but he was willing to love David, even though David had better circumstances on the surface. In 1 Timothy 6:6-8, we read, godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. When Paul wrote contentment, it's a word that describes a mind that's contented with its lot in life. This is my situation. This is my circumstance. This is my family. And I'm going to be content with that. Our English definition is satisfied with what one is or has. And envy begins to see what someone else has or what someone else has been afforded and what we have not, and begins to be discontent with our own life. Now, this is not to say that we can't have goals in our life or, want to do better in our life. But this is the idea that I'm not content because I see what another has been given that I have not. And I begin to have these feelings and emotions toward them. At this point, what Jonathan had or didn't have was because of his dad. And for David, he was selected because he was one of the sons of Jesse. Now, I remember becoming friends in high school with a guy whose parents were millionaires multiple times over. That's not my testimony. But he had parents who were millionaires, and on the surface, they had everything. They had everything that someone would want. They had anything in that want category, and I remember seeing all they had, all their stuff, all that had been afforded to them, and I had to reconcile the fact that his testimony just simply wasn't my testimony. And I couldn't live my life trying to tear him down so that I might feel better or envy his situation. No, I had to know that this is the line that God has for me to till. And this is the life that God had given me. And recognize the fact that the Lord had given me everything that I need. What does Paul say? Food and clothing. If we've got that, we are okay. But many get hung up on what their family was or was not. What their parents did that caused them to be in this particular situation. I got to tell you, Jonathan could have been there. It's dad's fault. It's my parents' fault. It's his fault. He's the one who ruined the thing. But Jonathan didn't. Jonathan didn't even go there. He didn't allow himself to go to envy. And that envy starts with that discontent. I read an article this week about, this is what it was titled, "We are a nation of the haves and the have-nots." We're a nation of haves and have-nots. And through their survey, they were asking many people on this matter, And what they found is that since the late 1980s, the percentage of people who classify themselves as in the category of the have-nots has doubled. It's like their place in terms of what it is, not a whole lot different, but this mindset that they have has changed to believe that they're in this group of the have-nots. It's doubled. Far more people believed in the 80s that they were a part of the have, that they had what they needed. And as I thought about this, I began to think maybe it's because we live in this world that is centered on telling us what we have not, that we think we're the have-nots. Like, I studied marketing for my undergrad. And let me just tell you, people get paid lots of money to make you feel some kind of way about what you don't have. Like, they spend hours and days thinking about just what they're going to put on that billboard over there to make you feel like you're lacking something so that you need to go that way. And you think about the things, those things that we think in our life that we need, and you look back on your life and you go, did I really need that? I mean, in the 1970s, everyone thought they needed a pet rock. Like, if you don't have a pet rock, you're in the have-nots, right? Or in the 80s, MC Hammer Pants. Anyone know about MC Hammer Pants? No one, just me? Okay, just look it up, okay? Look it up in the history books. Or in the 90s, they had these Jinko jeans. They were like this big, and you wore them. It was like bell bottoms all the way down, and they had little things sewn on there. Look those up too. In the 2000s, it was turtlenecks and frosted tips. It's like, I've got to have that. And everyone thought that they needed these things. I love the posture of my son. He's on to them. He sees these cell phone commercials and he's like, all they want you to do is buy a new phone. Why does everyone need a new phone all the time? I'm like, I don't know, man. I got an old phone. So you're preaching to the choir here. Amen, Eli. You keep that perspective. They're just trying to trick you into something, but what they're trying to show you is what you don't have. So you'll be discontent and try for that thing. There's this Japanese proverb. It says, even if you sleep in a room with 1,000 beds, you can only sleep on one of them. But isn't it so true that we see someone with 1,000 beds and it's like, well, I only have, can I just get a few more? No, you can only sleep on one. Jonathan had a commitment to contentment, but he was also willing to love David as himself. And I find it so interesting. And people have tried to twist that situation with Jonathan and David, but I'm having none of it. Because the fact of the matter is what Jonathan was doing is what Jesus told us to do. What did he say? Love your neighbor as yourself. He's asked that question. The Sadducees, the Pharisees, they get together. One of them says, teacher, what's the greatest commandment in the law, or the great commandment in the law? He said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. This is the greatest, foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Upon these two commandments hang the whole law and the prophets. Jonathan, even though David had what was taken away from him, loved David as himself. He puts on display what Jesus encourages us to today. Jonathan could have walked right into that trap of envy, but he didn't. And when Jesus said to love your enemy as yourself, he spoke of agape love, this total supreme love towards another person. That's what Jonathan had toward David. It's interesting when you look at the definition of love. 1 Corinthians 13, envy's on there. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not what? It does not envy. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It doesn't dishonor others. It's not self-seeking, not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but it rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. And Jonathan is even going to protect David. He loved him with a sincere love. Jonathan made the commitment to love and the commitment to contentment. And not only this, I want to look at what he did by giving him his robe. and giving him his bow and giving him his attire. One commentator described Jonathan's offering to David this way. He said to David by his action, you will be the next king of Israel. You should be dressed and armed as the crown prince. God's hand is on you. These rightfully belong to you. I mean, can you imagine the humility involved with that? Hey, you're the guy. You should be dressed like it. Here you go. I'm not going to need these. You are. He made the commitment. And so often when we see something that someone else has or something that we know that they ought to be, it can be very challenging to love them as ourselves. Why? Because Jonathan could have been like this. Well, here you go, but what am I going to wear? He did not say this. He just said, hey, this is right for you. And it's implied here, not written, but there's this sense that he trusts God with how God would clothe him, with what he needed to put on. I remember being in high school. I told you last week that I ran track. And there were two guys, me and another guy, we competed pretty heavily, but he was most of the time, he was the one winning. And there was this grand award that you would get each week. The whole track team, 2 people, would get a starburst. It was the starburst award. And if you did really well, you would get the starburst award. Well, up to my senior year, I had never been given the starburst award. And so finally, in this race, I did well, and I was the recipient of the Starburst Award. Now, this came at the expense of my teammate. Since I won, that means he had lost, and we were good friends. We would, talk a lot, encourage one another, and he'd been given it in the past, and I was always trying to be encouraging, but I got it, and guess what? That whole day, he wouldn't even look at me. I mean, he was mad. Like, he didn't even ask me for one. I totally would have given him one. Like, eat up, man. But he wouldn't even look at me, wouldn't talk about it, wouldn't congratulate me. And I was just so aware that he felt slighted by that. Now, fast forward a couple months later, I didn't win the race. He did, and he got the Starburst Award. And you know what I said? Eye for an eye. No, I didn't. I had to lay it down and say, yeah, he got me. Good job, dude. Can I have one? No, I didn't ask for one. But in giving his armor, he had an awareness not only of who David was, but what he was not. And he shows contentment and a love, even despite that. This reminds me of Christ, who, though he existed in the form of God, he came to the earth as the form of God, he humbled himself, taking on the form of a bondservant, not using that to his own advantage, but he took on the form of the bondservant, becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross, and God exalted him to the highest place, giving him the name that is above every name. You look at this story and you see the ones who exalt themselves and the ones who humble themselves. And who are the heroes we look back on? Those who walked with great humility. So that's the next point. The next C, clothe yourself with humility. Make the commitment to love and contentment. Clothe yourself with humility. David saw what was happening and he showed humility. I've heard humility called this way. It's not thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking of yourself less. I like that definition. And while Jonathan showed that disposition, his father showed much different. We saw verses 5-9. David, it says, went into battle, and wherever Saul sent him, he achieved success. So Saul would send him here and there. He would be successful. Saul then put him in charge of the men of war, and it was pleasing in the sight of all the people and Saul's servants. And now it happened, it says, when they were coming, when David returned from killing the Philistine, that the women came out from the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with joy and other musical instruments. The women sang and played. Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. And then Saul became very angry The lyric displeased him, and he said, they have given to David credit for 10,000s, but to me only thousands? Now what more can he have but the kingdom? And it says, Saul eyed David with suspicion from that day on. He had jealous eyes toward David. David had killed Goliath. He enters into the king's service. And what we've seen up to this point is even after David was anointed as the next king, what is he doing? He's playing the harp for Saul. He's trying to soothe Saul, to help Saul. He was like his personal Spotify player. You didn't have that back then. I even tell my kids, when I was growing up, if you wanted to hear a song, you had to listen to the radio just about all day before it would come on. Now you can just pull it right up. Well, Saul had that like way back. He would go, David, play the hits. And so David would play those hits on his harp. Come on, I'm paraphrasing. Anyway, I'm just embellishing. Anyway, he had David instead of Spotify. Now, once David went into the full-time service, he always achieved success in battle. And what happens is, remember this. Remember what happened back in chapter 13? Jonathan got the victory, but Saul came out, blew his own horn, and he says, Saul got the victory. And so some commentators believe that this would start this repeated thing. Anytime there was a victory, Saul would come out, Saul, and people would sing Saul's praises. And so some people say maybe there was even a particular song, that the women would sing. Saul has slain his thousands. And Saul loved to hear that. He loved verse 1. But now they added verse 2. Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. And while we don't know if there was a specific song, we know that it says all the women came out. And they start singing David's praises. And this song was a popular one. It was the number one hit in the land from based on what we can see. And it says that Saul became angry. And that word angry was hot, burning, kindled incense. He was fired up. Verse 8, then Saul became very angry. The lyric displeased him. That should be a thing. When you look at someone with suspicion, it should be you sold them, okay? Anyway, it was chapter 15. He had disobeyed the Lord. And now he's saying, what more can he have but the kingdom? In other words, he's saying, this is the guy. This is the guy who's going to take my place. And he eyes him with suspicion and jealousy. He looks upon him this way. Now, what's the situation? They're giving Saul credit, right? They're saying Saul's slain thousands, but David his 10,000s. Saul was jealous because he wanted to be the one in the second half of the verse. He's getting more credit than me. So what does this boil down to? Pride. Saul was the opposite of humility. He was prideful. He wanted to be the one. You might even remember after Samuel said, the kingdom's going to be ripped from you. What did Saul say? He said, go honor me in front of the people. And now the people are honoring David. Oh, he's so enraged. He's so fired up. Now, pride is another word that we see in the Bible, and it's a word that is always referred to negatively. Pride is not a good thing. James 4:6, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. The word for proud is to show oneself above, preeminent, overestimating oneself, their means, their merits. Other words translated pride in the New Testament depict one who trusts in their own power, their own way, and puts their trust in empty things. Psalm 10:4, in his pride, the wicked man does not seek God. In all his ways, there is no room for God. The term here, again, means to put oneself above, exalt oneself. It's actually a word that's described of Goliath in 1 Samuel 17. Proverbs 16:18, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before stumbling. It's better to be humble in spirit with the needy than to divide the spoils with the proud. 1 John 2:16, for everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life comes not from the Father, but from the world. Proverbs 11:2, when pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. Saul wanted to be above. And in his wanting to be above, in his exalting himself, he was going to be humbled. We're going to see this continually in the story. There's a story told about a fable, actually, about the envious eagle. So there was this eagle that could fly faster, further, and higher than all the other eagles. And there was one, let's call one David and the other Saul. Okay, just for fun. So David's like flying high, he could get way up there. And then the eagle Saul, he's envious of that other one. And so he goes to a sportsman and he says, hey, I'd like you to shoot him down. And he says, well, I'll gladly do that, but I need a few feathers so that my arrow will go further. So he pulls out some arrows. Then he gives the arrows, and then the sportsman shoots up there and misses. He says, it's not high enough. I need more feathers. So he pulls out some more feathers. Here, take these. This happens a couple more times, so much so that now this eagle has no feathers on him. He's given them all to the sportsman to take down this other one. And he turns around and shoots the one who had no feathers. He was an easy target. He was trying to exalt himself, and now he gets humbled. I know, it's a little bloody, but that's what happens. And Saul is trying to exalt himself. He's taken off all his feathers, get David, but what's going to happen is he's going to go down in the process. 2 Corinthians 10:17-18, let the one who boasts in the Lord, let the one who boast in the Lord. For it's not the one who commends himself that's approved, but the one the Lord commends. Saul commended himself. David did the opposite. Again and again, David pointed and looked to the Lord in difficulty. Psalm 25:8, the Lord is good and upright. Therefore, he instructs the sinners in his way. He leads the humble in justice. He teaches the humble his way. Jesus said in Matthew 23, whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. With suspicious eyes and anger, David remained in Saul's service, and here's what happens. 1 Samuel 18:10, now it came about on the next day that an evil spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved in the midst of the house while David was playing the harp with his hand as usual. And a spear was in Saul's hand, and Saul hurled the spear, for he thought, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped from his presence twice. So Saul is now plagued by an evil spirit again. It says that he's raving throughout the place all night. He's enraged, he's raving. And his people say, well, we need to calm this guy down. Go get the harp player, go get David. And so David comes in, he starts playing the hits, so to speak. And Saul takes the spear while he's doing that and throws it at him to kill him. And we don't get the details as to how he came back in the room, but I just think in my mind, like David left the room, Saul's still in there raving, and his guys are like, get in there. Like, you're the only one who can stop this. And so David goes back into the room, starts playing his harp again, and Saul throws the spear again. It says David escaped the spear 2 times. And so I find it interesting that David's response was escaping rather than retaliating. He didn't retaliate. He didn't go against him. And we will see this kind of thing as the story continues. Saul is going to continually try to take David's life. David's going to have opportunities to kill Saul, and he won't do it. He won't retaliate. David was not willing to get into the trap of envy and jealousy. He chose humility. He was allowing the Lord to sort that out. There's this story I told at the men's Bible study recently about a man who saw a snake in a fire. And when he saw the snake in the fire, he reached into the fire to get the snake, and the snake bit the man. And the man did what anyone did. He let go of the snake. Seeing the snake in the fire, he went back into the fire and grabbed the snake again in order to save him. Got that snake out of there, and the people who saw what happened said, what's the matter with you? That snake just bit you. Why would you do that? And he said, To bite is the nature of the snake. To save is my nature. I'm not going to let the nature of that snake change my nature. David was not going to allow the nature of that snake change his nature, nor should we. We should not allow the fact that we live in a prideful society to change us from seeking humility and the way of our Lord. We should not allow the posture and the way that others try to bite and devour cause us to try to do the same. No, I'll give that to you, and I'm going to trust God with what I need to be clothed in. And what I need to be clothed in is humility. So what we read in verse 13 is Saul removed him from his presence and appointed him commander of 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people, and David was successful in all his ways, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw he was very successful, he was afraid of him. But Israel and Judah loved David, for he would go out to battle and return before them. Can you believe this? Saul was afraid of David. David's just getting out of there. I'd be afraid of Saul, but David wasn't. And so Saul, since he can't take him out with his spear, he promotes him. Well, why would he promote him? Because as commander of 1,000, he would have to go out to war more opportunity for him to be taken out from the others. 1 Peter 5:5, clothe yourselves with humility toward one another, because God is opposed to the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you at the proper time. When will God exalt you if you humble yourself under his hand? At the what time? Who defines the proper time? Him. He defines the proper time. I just say, this is my nature. This is who you're calling me to be. This is who I'm going to be. I'm going to pursue humility, not the other things. And I'm going to trust that you'll exalt me at the proper time. And if you haven't defined that time yet, I'm just going to keep doing what you've called me to do. And I'm going to keep trusting, and I'm going to keep living, and I'm going to keep avoiding, and I'm going to keep escaping that trap of envy and jealousy. Here's the last point. Cast your cares on the Lord continually. Make the commitment to love and contentment. Clothe yourself in humility. Cast your cares on the Lord continually. So, what Saul ends up doing is he first exposes David to danger, putting him in charge of more men, more battles, more wars. And then he exposes him to his daughters. And what he says is that I'm going to give my oldest daughter to him. That way, the Philistines will be against him, not me. In other words, if you marry Saul's daughter, now you're in the royal family. You're a marked man. You go out to battle, you're well known. Not just for killing Goliath, but for being a part of Saul's family. David really is like, far be it from me, like I'm not on that level to be in the king's family. Saul ends up doing kind of a bait and switch of sorts. He gives that daughter to someone else, but he has another daughter who says loved David. And what he says, it says, now Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David. And when they informed Saul the thing that was pleasing to him, for Saul thought, I will give her to him so that she may be a trap for him, that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Therefore, Saul said to David, for a second time, you may be my son-in-law today. He's giving him this opportunity. And what does he say? I'm going to have him marry this daughter because she's going to be a trap to him. Another scripture says she will be a snare to him. She'll trap him up. She'll trip him up. Now, she's going to do some good things for David, but there's also going to be some snare type situations. They'll have a disagreement. Things aren't going to always be the best. But as the story continues in this chapter, what we see is David's like, I'm not worthy. I don't even have the dowry. A dowry is like a bride price. So Saul takes advantage and says, David, go get 100 Philistine foreskins and you can have my daughter. That'll be your dowry. Okay? Now, David goes out and he gets 200. Now, if you don't know how someone would get foreskins, look it up. I need to cut to the chase, okay? Anyway, it's a little graphic. So let's move on. Okay. David, 28, realized that the Lord was with David and that Michal, his daughter, loved him, and he was even more afraid of him. So Saul was David's enemy continually. Then the commanders of the Philistines went to battle, and it happened as often as they went out, David was more successful than all the servants of Saul. So his name was held in high esteem. Let's just look at that last point in brief. Cast your cares on the Lord continually. What was going on? It says Saul set himself as David's enemy continually. But David was trusting the Lord, seeking the Lord, and through his story, and as he writes in the Psalms about his experience, David all the while was casting his cares on the Lord continually. Saul was trying to cast him out, cast him down, take him out, take him down, find any way to do so. David cast his cares on the Lord continually. I was reminded of Psalm 91, he who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge, my fortress, my God, in whom I trust, for it is he who delivers you from the snare of the trapper and from deadly pestilence. He will cover you with his pinions. Under his wing you may seek refuge. His faithfulness and shield are a bulwark or wall. The Lord would cover David, and David would cast his cares on the Lord. In the very next chapter, we're going to see in the next few weeks that Saul will place a hit out on David's life, putting men around his house so that they'll kill him in the morning. But it's at that time that we get a great psalm, Psalm chapter 59, where David, as Saul's trying to cast him out and cast him down and take him out, Psalm 59, David cries out to the Lord and he writes this beautiful psalm, rescue me from my enemies, my God. Set me surely on high, away from those who rise up against me. Rescue me from those who practice injustice and save me from the men of bloodshed. And I'm so thankful that we have the Psalms to read. What we need to know is that we can humble ourselves under his mighty hand. We can cast our anxieties on the Lord, and it's him who will bring rescue. It's him who will exalt at the proper time. And I want to close this way. Maybe you're in here today and you've been struggling with jealousy and envy of another. Maybe doing things in your job or in your neighborhood or at your work to tear someone else down. Wanting what they have and struggling with your own lot in life. Struggling with the things that God has given you or being content in that particular place. But I want to remind you of a verse here from earlier. It says that envy rots the bones. There's a better way. There's a better way than that. And I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands or come up here and let everybody know, but you know if that's you. You know if you've been struggling with that. You know if you've been dealing with that. And I'm going to ask you this morning, would you cast those cares upon the Lord? Because when you cast those cares on the Lord rather than another, what you're going to receive is knowledge and knowing in head and in heart that he cares for you. And not only that, that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. And if you want that easy yoke, if you've been so worried about everything that's surrounding or a particular situation, now's the opportunity. Let's bow our heads, let's close our eyes, and let's say, Lord, I'm giving this to you. I'm casting my cares upon you. I'm trusting you that you will clothe me with everything that I need. I'm trusting you with my future. I'm trusting you with my today. I'm trusting you all the way to eternity. And Lord, I've been holding on to this bitter envy. I've been holding on to this jealousy. I've been coveting all these things. Lord, I ask, rescue me from this. And I believe that as you give that to the Lord now, he will take it And he'll release you from that burden that you've been carrying. And he'll give you his light burden and his easy yoke. And I just pray, Lord, as they do that, as they surrender and humble themselves under your hand, that it would be just as you said to your son, you're my child. I'm well pleased with you doing this. That's not the way. I'm the way. Follow me. We ask this in Jesus' mighty name. And all God's people say, amen.